It's time for me to be honest with you. I have been living a complete and utter lie, and I have made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment. As much as I love to come on this channel and talk about music, there's so much of it that I still haven't explored. All my life I've been aware of certain artists, bands, and musical fads, but I never got deeper into them. And that was mainly all up until the pandemic. If I say the real name, they take my money. When forced seclusion made me take a deeper interest into the music that I listened to, and I learned to appreciate music as an art form and grow respect for the artists that contribute to making that art form great. For the most part. Now, for me, R&B and hip-hop have been my favorite genres since I was out the womb. Even I just found this out recently. When I was a baby, my cousins played The College Dropout and Late Registration for me. But still, I feel like there's so much that I've been missing out on. So many artists that I haven't given the time. And it's gotten to the point where being complacent with listening to the same artists again and again is starting to become tiring. So I felt it was important to start expanding my palette of these R&B and rap stars. But this journey brings forth a very shameful truth. One that will get me shunned by almost any R&B fan or gay person. And if you've read the title of this video, you are now aware of my shameful secret. I have never listened to Frank Ocean. Now let me clarify, when I say never, I'm being a bit hyperbolic here. Of course I've heard his music before. Frank Ocean is frequently considered a modern day legend, writing and working with some of the biggest names in music before even stepping on the mic, cultivating a passionate ride or die fan base despite his elusiveness and reclusive nature, and his only 2 studio albums being considered some of not just the greatest R&B albums of all time, but greatest albums of all time, period. There is literally no way in hell to not have heard this man's music before. For me though, the only 2 Frank Ocean solo songs that I was aware of were Chanel and the Lens remix with Travis Scott. But still, I've heard his amazing voice throughout my entire life, as he has collaborated with many of my more frequented artists. He was on No Church in the Wild, that phenomenal New Slaves outro, Wolves, or now Frank's track, Slide, Carousel, and the list goes on. And a further realization, and one that I've been making a lot more recently, is that his music has been sprinkled throughout a lot of my childhood memories. It took me way too long in life to realize that the "A potato flew around my room" vine was a play on the opening words from Thinking About You. I thought it was the other way around for some reason. But despite my awareness of him being a talented musician, for some reason, I was hesitant to do a deep dive into his discography. Many of my friends hyped him up as this incredibly depressing, gut-wrenching, emotional artist, and that his music only really hits when you've gone through a heartbreak. And for me, since, one has to communicate with human beings in order to be heartbroken, I haven't been in that position in a long time. And I also believe that when listening to an artist's discography, especially for the first time, it's something that I need to put the utmost respect and focus into. I don't feel like I can really appreciate someone's art if I'm just doing my homework or grocery shopping while I'm listening to it. And I pushed this back further and further until I realized that not only was I stalling myself for a very arbitrary reason to some degree, and I could finally experience this beloved visionary for the first time, but I can also make a bit of money doing so. Money's not bad. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you all my opinions and first ever experience of the discography of the legendary Christopher Bro, otherwise known as Frank Ocean. A couple disclaimers that I need to make before this video continues though is that 1, while I will be discussing his albums, this is not like a super comprehensive breakdown of each one of them. I made these videos to mainly just share my opinions on Frank's artistic and personal growth as a first-time listener. There are plenty of people who have beat me to the punch on these kinds of videos, and I will be linking them in the description if you are interested. But, watch me first. I'm more important than all of them. And secondly, I will be focusing mainly on Frank's solo material, as I know he was a very major member of a certain LA-based hip-hop collective, and I don't want it to seem like I view them as unimportant to Frank's story, because they are, but for the purpose of this video, I will be mainly staying away from them. Staying away sounds harsh. I don't know why I said staying away, but I mean, if you are interested in a video on that certain group, you can let a brother know down in the comments, but I digress. Born Christopher Edwin Bro on October 28th, 1987, Christopher was born in Long Beach, California, raised by his mother, Katonia Bro Riley, a residential contractor. and his father, Calvin Edward Cooksey, who happened to be a professional singer and keyboarder. Following his parents' divorce at age 6, he relocated with his mother to New Orleans, Louisiana, and would spend the rest of his childhood and adolescence there, being a bit of a rebel as a kid. While briefly attending a Lutheran religious school, for example, his edgy streak, for lack of a better term, got him kicked out of the school, with Christopher himself saying that he, quote, got kicked out of every school that he went to, and that the last school that kicked him out had a folder of shit that he had done, and that they sent the folder in a manila envelope to his house. He even apparently sold a bit of crack while in high school. Jesus Christ, what is it with alternative R&B musicians and cocaine? Around this time, he also started gaining a love for music. He started becoming more and more enticed with the financial opportunities that it could give him, and Christopher would start making music more and more in high school, with the typical kind of reservations from his mother. He graduated high school in 2005 and enrolled in the University of New Orleans to study English. Unfortunately, that would be the same year that Hurricane Katrina ravaged New Orleans, destroying all of his music and recording equipment, giving birth to one of the greatest moments in TV history, and of course, forcing Christopher and his family to relocate, then having to transfer to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He only attended there a brief time, though, before deciding to drop out, trying to see where this music thing could take him. A friend that he had in LA promised Christopher that he could clock him in some studio time, and without hesitation, he relocated back to California with the dreams of making it big in music. And the funny thing is, up until that point, he wasn't making that much music seriously, as he struggled to get the bills paid when he first moved to LA, even saying that he ran out of money before he could even get any music done. He would work various entry-level jobs at places like Subway and AT&T to sustain himself while working on his music career. We have to keep in mind here as well that this was taking place in the early 2000s, where it is a 1 in a billion chance of you being able to be successful as an independent artist, so finding a label to back him would be crucial for Christopher's success. He would fortunately find a bit of a cheat code that can not only get him the attention of music labels, but also start making him actual money in the music industry. He started connecting with local producers and writers that submitted their works to major labels, doing so under the name Lonnie Bro, Lonnie being a nickname that his late grandfather gave him. Christopher worked with many of these producers, mainly writing melodies and lyrics, and his first 3 major writing credits would be on the songs First in Love by early 2000s R&B sensation Brandy, Quickly by John Legend and Brandy, his reference track even leaking a couple years later.
If I had $20 million in the vault somewhere, baby. If I had $20 million in the vault somewhere, baby.
And the song Bigger for, at the time, budding pop sensation Justin Bieber. And while none of these songs ended up being smash hits or anything, writing for 3 of the biggest music acts at the time would obviously get people talking about you. He would catch the eye of Christopher Tricky Stewart, an R&B producer legend responsible for hits like Single Ladies and Umbrella. And with Tricky's industry connections, he was able to get Christopher to sign with Def Jam towards the end of 2009 as a solo artist, finally adopting the moniker that we all know him as today, Frank Ocean, getting the name from the late great Frank Sinatra and the film Ocean's 11 that Sinatra was featured in. 2009 was just a great year for Frank in general. He started making enough money to make a decent living off of music. He joined and met Odd Future. He finally got his record deal, and the best part of it all, Halo 3 ODST came out that year, which isn't related to Frank at all because he was a PlayStation and Nintendo kid, but I just feel it necessary to start making obligatory Halo references in my videos moving forward. But 2010 would unfortunately be a year of frustration for Frank. Though his deal would be finalized in January of 2010, making him officially a Def Jam artist, for the entirety of that year, he was more or less ignored by the label when it comes to him wanting to release his own music. And once more, we need to be in the world of an artist in the early 2000s. Despite having a record deal, there was no major buzz behind Frank outside of the industry. And from a business perspective, it makes a bit of sense why they ignored him. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just making a point. Normally, labels will give artists budgets or advances to work on their music, with the hopes that they will make a return on their investment in album sales. And the amount given is based on what they can make off of you. So obviously, giving upwards of $1,000 to millions of dollars to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that you sign to a record label would not be a great business decision. But it sucks for these artists, because once you sign to a record label, they basically own you. Frank was not allowed to release any music without the backing and support of Def Jam, and because they were ignoring him, he was kind of just stuck at square one once again. And even then, his deal with Def Jam was shit anyway, with Frank only getting a reported 14% of his album sales, and of course with them not really willing to promote him or assist him with his music, it was again stuck at square one. The first musical offerings from Frank, though, would be posted on his SoundCloud and Tumblr in late 2010. Those songs being Heartbreak and Jetlag and Pyrite, Fool's Gold, both uploaded on October 24th, 2010. But with growing frustration with his label, his new friend and future collaborator Tyler the Creator would encourage Frank on February 16th, 2011 to surprise release his debut mixtape to his Tumblr and the Odd Future Bandcamp a month later, completely for free. The now unforgettable Nostalgia Ultra. Inspired by the unfortunate coming-of-age event that was Hurricane Katrina, Frank reflects on his childhood, past relationships, and his first ever heartbreak. And now that you have the full story of Frank's come-up, I can finally talk about his music. And I am very scared to piss off Frank Ocean fans, but here we go. Okay, I assumed that my lights could get more orange than that, but it's okay. This mixtape starts off with the intro skit, Street Fighter. It begins with the changing of cassette tapes. The cassette in question is the 2008 album Viva La Vida, or Death and All His Friends by Coldplay. Frank is heard skipping through the album until you get to its penultimate track, Strawberry Swing. The skit ends with a transition into the first proper song on the album, the aptly titled Strawberry Swing. And from the jump, I already could tell that I was in for a treat with Frank. This project already starts off on a very somber and reflective mood. This song is very much like remembering a fond childhood memory just to have it ripped from you as you have to come back to reality. It was a great way to start this mixtape. Something worth noting here is that many of these songs on Nostalgia Ultra are heavily sample-based. So that is why some of these songs maintain the same titles and maintain a lot of the same musical elements. But that adds to its charm. You are already in a nostalgic mood hearing some of the music that you might have grown up with, making this tape's theme of nostalgia pop even more. We would then go on to get Frank's first hit song and the first single that Def Jam officially released for him, the iconic Novocaine. And when I say it's my first time listening to this man's discography, it really is. Of course, I've heard snippets from this song throughout my life and through social media, but hearing it for the first time was truly something special. And this, especially paired with its award-winning music video, it's no wonder that this song became a hit. It is an instant classic. The next song would be the track We All Try, a song about trying to find faith in a belief system of one's choosing. To me, it's kind of just alright. I do like that he kind of hints at a certain something that will be relevant later, but to me it's a very alright song. We then skip to the next skit, Bitches Talkin' Metal Gear Solid. In this skit, Frank is talking to some bitches who are indeed talking. And in the background, we hear the song Optimistic by Radiohead. And one of the girls that Frank is with asks him to turn it off and play some Jodeci instead, being confused as to why Frank would want to listen to this kind of music in the first place. And I feel like this skit kind of shows us how Frank felt somewhat misunderstood when he was younger, as you see someone questioning him as to why he would want to listen to an alt-rock band like Radiohead rather than the popular R&B and rap acts of the time. This leads well into the next song, Songs for Women, a track where Frank sings about how his passion for music not only seems to drive women away, but is also a bit of a double-edged sword, as he has to sit there and wonder if he's making music because he truly does have a passion for it, or if he's doing it because he's just trying to get some cooch. Once more, an okay track, but it's nothing I found super special. But the next song is called Love Crimes, a song about a girl that Frank got pregnant as both of them debate whether or not to get an abortion. The production almost immediately stood out to me. It is one of the only songs on the album that is not sample based, and it fucking bangs. The mixtape so far has been on a bit of a more positive tone, you could say, with themes of love and lust, things that would go on to be standards of Frank's music in the future. But then we get to the GoldenEye skit transition. And this reminds me of something I should point out here. If you haven't noticed, all of these skits and transitions have been titled after 90s N64 games, except for Metal Gear Solid, that was a PS1 game. It's a welcome touch to the whole mixtape's nostalgia motif. But on GoldenEye, Frank switches his cassette to the 2009 album Straight No Chaser by British singer-songwriter Mr. Hudson. He flips through the tape until it switches to the following song of the same name, There Will Be Tears. The rest of the mixtape is more somber in tone, and that change is very apparent on a song like this. Here, he reflects on growing up with an absent father and talks about how he looked up to his grandfather as his father figure. His grandfather had just passed away in 2010, adding to what was already a frustrating year for Frank. And this song is amazing. Frank has grown a reputation for pulling on your heartstrings, and to witness this kind of emotional depth on his first project, no less, is nothing short of amazing. The next song would be Swim Good, the only other song to see an official release from this project, featuring some Tyler the Creator backing vocals. And this song, once again, bangs. I am a sucker for songs with upbeat production that touch on dark or sad topics. With lyrics like, I'm about to drive in the ocean, you can imagine the song is a bit dark. Here, after a breakup and the beginning of his music career starting to pop off, Frank is overwhelmed by the ocean, so to speak. Thank you, I'll be here all night. Of opportunities in front of him, reminding himself to swim good. And this song has a very obvious 808s and heartbreak influence. Frank even making a slight reference to that album in the song. But it doesn't feel like a cheap copy. This is like the natural evolution of that sound. Once more, another thing to praise Frank for. Many aspiring artists tend to just copy and paste what the people that they admire have done before them and hope for the same result. But for Frank to take the 808s formula and evolve and improve upon it, again, on his first project no less, is pure talent. The following song would be the track Dust, another somber track where Frank reflects on a past love but decides that life is too short and that he needs to move on. The song has grown on me a bit since the first listen, but once more, I say this a lot, but it's alright. But Following Dust is the penultimate song on the album, and potentially the most infamous Frank Ocean song of all time, American Wedding, a song that samples the iconic Hotel California by the Eagles, a track where Frank cynically looks at fictional American weddings of young lovers that seem to be doomed from the start. And the reason for this song's infamy is because of the incredibly petty legal battle that it spawned. The lead singer of the Eagles, Don Henley, did not approve of the Hotel California sample, and to this day is notorious for not clearing usage of any of his works, either solo or Eagles work at all. But like I said before, Nostalgia Ultra was a free mixtape that Frank put available for download. Outside of Novocaine and Swim Good when they were later released as singles, Frank did not see a dime off this project, and was well within his legal rights to make the song, because he was not selling it for any kind of profit, even if Don had a stick up his ass. But despite that, it seems like said stick was shoved way up in there, because after Frank performed the song for the first and only time, any further performances would omit the Hotel California instrumental, Warner Music Group put out a statement on behalf of Don and the Eagles, saying that the sample usage was illegal, which, again, it wasn't. And Frank responding in a now archived Tumblr post, saying that not only are Don and the Eagles threatening to sue him if he were to ever perform the song again, but also saying, quote, "Ain't this guy rich as fuck? Why sue the new guy? I didn't make a dime off that song. I released it for free. If anything, I'm paying homage." The last statement surrounding this song would come from Don in 2014, where he claimed that Frank was being arrogant about the song dispute. Once again, a statement that just shows me that Don just has that stick just way jammed up in there, and he just doesn't want to take it out for some reason. But I digress. Now, for me, and I'm sure a lot of Frank fans are gonna not like what I'm about to say here, the song is it's okay. It's good. Don't get me wrong, it is a great cover of Hotel California. But not only do I like the OG song a bit more, but I feel like this controversy hyped this up so much for me in my head. So when I heard the sample and was ready to hear what so many people, have been fighting about on the internet for the past few years, like, it kind of fell short for me. Again, it's not a bad song, but it's like, it just felt overhyped. Still, a great listen. Before this tape ends, we get one more cassette change with the skit Soul Caliber. Frank pops in a copy of the 2007 MGMT album Oracular Spectacular. This then leads into the final song on the project, Nature Feels, which samples the hit MGMT song Electric Feel. It somewhat feels like a return to normalcy. After spending the project reflecting on past loves and heartbreaks and grief, he ends the project on this deep philosophical track about how he wants to have sex with a girl in the woods. absolute poetry. The mixtape ends abruptly, with the Electric Feel outro being cut off, and Frank taking the tape out of the cassette player, kind of implying that it's time for Frank to stop reminiscing and get back to real life. But with the removal of the tape being the last song on the project, the tape can be played in a perfect loop, where Frank pops in his Vita La Vida cassette tape and can go on this journey of reminiscing once more. All in all, a very good project. My only issue with Nostalgia Ultra is some of its weaker points. We All Try, Songs for Women, and Dust just don't hit the same for me as the other songs did. But I still feel like it reflects well on Frank, because so far, he does not have a bad song. They're just songs that aren't my personal cup of tea. And to have that kind of quality on your debut project is a great quality to have. And my nitpicks on some of those songs don't take away from the fact that overall, it was a great project. The samples chosen really did hit. I really felt the nostalgia when listening to the album, especially as a kid who grew up in the late 2000s. While listening to the mixtape, like, no joke, I felt like I was back at home playing the Xbox with my little sister. Which, speaking of which, she got me this new bear that's holding my official YouTube plaque. His name is Bodacious T. Shout out to you, sis. I love you. Most R&B artists would have to work years to make a project as great as this. And for Frank to have this as his debut, once again, immediately showed the world what Frank Ocean was capable of and had us all excited to see what was next. So for me, Nostalgia Ultra gets a crisp 7.5 out of 10 for me. Now, from this point, 2011 would go on to be a prolific and name-making year for Frank. Nostalgia Ultra was critically acclaimed and loved by fans everywhere, now forcing Def Jam to pay attention to him. They released Novocaine and Swim Good as singles, with the promise of releasing Nostalgia Ultra as a cut-down EP, but as you can imagine, a song with many, unclearable samples is a legal mess. So unfortunately, Def Jam would just scrap it. Which sucks, because they could have at least compiled songs with original production like Love Crimes and We All Try. I would have loved to have Love Crimes be on streaming, but thank God for local files. But despite that, the winning streak would continue for Frank. He started catching the eye of some of the biggest names in rap and R&B, the most notable, of course, being Kanye West, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. That summer, Frank would work with Kanye and Jay-Z on their 2011 collab album, Watch the Throne. The album with that hit song that, you watching might not be able to say the name of. Frank would be featured twice on the album. Once on track 11, Made in America, and of course on the album's forever iconic intro, No Church in the Wild. As you can imagine, working with two rap legends on a very successful collab album would continue the conversations about you. And having one of your newest collaborators be married to one of the most prolific singers of all time is an added bonus. Frank would write the song I Miss You off of Beyonce's 2011 album 4. And he would also make his musical debut in Odd Future, featuring on Tyler the Creator's cult classic She off of Goblin, and Steamroller by Odd Future member Domo Genesis, featured on the compilation tape aptly titled 12 Odd Future Songs, officially released in October 2011. All in all, Frank had a pretty awesome year, ending 2011 with the entire world in his hands. And 2012 would go on to be another big year for Frank in a lot of ways. After the release of Nostalgia Ultra, Frank was already getting to work on his proper debut album. While the tape was still growing in popularity, in May of 2011, Frank would strike a sweet deal with Def Jam. They would give him a $1 million advance to work on this debut project, giving him full creative control. He worked closely with producers/friends James Ryan Ho, or Malay, and Omaze Keith, I really hope I'm saying that right, I'm sorry, on this project, even scoring some additional production from people like Tyler the Creator and Pharrell Williams. According to Frank, the album was written within 2 weeks and finished within 3. So here comes July 2012. While the album was set for release on the 17th, inspired by Kanye and Jay-Z's strategy for Watch the Throne, he would release the iTunes digital edition of the album a week early, on July 10th. But there's one major event that happened just 4 days before this album was set to come out. As the album's release date was approaching, certain rumors about Frank started to circulate as album reviewers who got the album early were starting to talk about the subject matter on this album. He originally wanted to put this in his album's thank you notes, but just decided to post this on Tumblr. So, on July 6th, Frank posted to his Tumblr one of the most vulnerable statements an artist has ever made. The open letter, aptly titled Thank Yous. Written on December 27th, 2011, in this beautiful letter, Frank would thank his first love for inspiring his music, and this first love happened to be a man. During the summer of 2007, he fell closer and closer in love with him, and at a certain point felt like he needed to tell him. And while this unnamed man seemed to take it positively, he did not reciprocate those feelings. In fact, he had a girlfriend at the time, only telling him 3 years later that he felt the same way. And within that time, they would maintain what Frank would describe as a peculiar friendship, as Frank had grown so attached to this person he couldn't see him letting their relationship go. Frank stated that he would channel, once again, I'm here all week, his heartbreak into his music, leading to these songs from his 2 projects at the time. He then thanks his friends for being empathetic and compassionate towards him when he opened up about this to them, and thanks his mother as well, ending the letter saying that he felt like a free man. And look, I did not do that letter justice at all, so I will be linking it in the description if you want to read it, but it is beautiful. This is another reason why people love Frank Ocean, his willingness to just be open and vulnerable. This wasn't just some cookie cutter, I'm queer announcement. He shared a beautiful story with the world to get his point across. Frank was 4 days away from releasing his debut full-length album and still felt it necessary to share this story. And once more, we need to think about society and culture in the early 2010s. Sure, within that decade, a lot of Western society started to become more and more accepting of LGBTQIA+ people, but that was still quite a risky move on Frank's part. Coming out as queer or bi, especially as a black male R&B singer, had major social ramifications. Rap and R&B have a previous history of not being the most accepting to gay and trans folks, unfortunately an issue that is still prevalent today. Before his first ever commercial debut project, Frank was already going to ostracize many of his potential listeners, and I'm sure some executive at Def Jam was shitting their pants when this news came out. But he didn't care and just felt that he needed to share this story, and that took some major freaking guts to do. And Frank received overwhelming support from fans, fellow celebrities, and fellow musicians alike, stamping this letter as one of the most legendary and impactful moments in music ever. And 4 days after that letter, of course, we would finally get Frank Ocean's Grammy Award-winning iconic debut album, Channel Orange. Inspired by the heartbreak experienced by the subject of his open letter, who for the rest of this video we will refer to as Letter Boy, Frank tells us the stories of people experiencing feelings of loneliness, unrequited love, and all tied to the central theme of blinding oneself from reality. Oh wow, this video is going to be long as a motherfucker. The album starts off with the aptly titled skit, Start. We hear Frank at the end of a conversation as he heads back into his house. He turns on his TV and is greeted with a PlayStation 1 startup sound, a slight nod to his previous project. This somewhat teases that Nostalgia Ultra and Channel Orange can be considered companion pieces. The album's first proper track was its lead single and another one of Frank's first hits, Thinking About You. Originally written for Bridget Kelly, a singer who would work with Jay-Z on tour, replacing Alicia Keys for performances of Empire State of Mind, she would embark on a solo career in 2011, ultimately retiring in 2014. The original demo or reference track that Frank had written for her leaked in July of 2011, originally titled Thinking About Forever, with Frank eventually deciding to keep it for himself, touch up the vocals, properly mix it, and release it as a single 9 months later. And, as you can imagine from the title, Frank wrestles with his feelings for someone, most likely Letter Boy, going from being emotional about the mere thought of them, to then trying to convince himself he wasn't even all that into him in the first place, then going back to being in love again. All in all, I get why this song became a hit. Frank just glides over this incredibly simple instrumental with clear improvement in his vocals since Nostalgia Orange. Did I just say Nostalgia Orange? What the fuck? I've been listening to this man's music for too long. Since Nostalgia Ultra, a great start. Coming off of Thinking About You is Fertilizer, a very short skit or interlude, where Frank skips through TV channels and lands on someone singing a cover of the song Fertilizer by James Fauntleroy. This ties to the themes of unrequited love, as Frank begs this person he loves to give him even a gram of attention, saying that he will take literal bullshit if that's all they can give him. It is quite a jarring message to come off the back of Thinking About You. The next song is Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone tells the story of a young couple recklessly having unprotected sex, acknowledging that if they were to get pregnant, it would be a very tough situation situation for the both of them, as they don't make enough money to sustain themselves, both still living with their respective parents, let alone be able to support a child. But the predictable happens, and it becomes a sobering and maturing moment for the couple, as they begin to embark on this new journey together. Another great song, even though it doesn't seem to fit with the album's main themes that much. The next track is Sweet Life. What is framed as an appreciation of a life of luxury really tells the tale of someone who uses their privileged life in order to blind themselves from the real issues that they face. For me, this song was okay. Nothing super special. Once more, Frank has no bad songs in my opinion so far, by any means, but they're just not my personal cup of tea. Especially because I have heard and will hear better, Before the next proper song, we get the just under a minute skit, Not Just Money, featuring Rosie Watson, the mother of one of Frank's childhood friends. Frank seems to stop the TV and listen to a voicemail that she left him, reminding Frank and us listeners that for the most of us, money is not just something that we have an abundance of. It's something that we have to work for in order to make ends meet or even be able to afford any kind of luxury. And continuing with the themes of the darker side of luxury life, we get the classic Super Rich Kids with Odd Future member Earl Sweatshirt. This song is a lot more direct with its messaging than the other songs on this album, but here, Frank tells the story of super rich kids who seem to have a life of luxury that people would kill for, but despite having all the money and opportunities in the world that they could ask for, their lives are incredibly vapid, surrounded by an unfathomable amount of money, fake people, and a desire to find a real connection with somebody. Earl's verse reads as a bit of a cry for help. He raps that regular people won't relate to his struggles, feeling that his parents are both absent from his life while still begging for their attention, intentionally getting into reckless hijinks, saying that he is on the verge of a breakdown. It is a decently sad song that reminds us all that even those who seem to have it all can't escape misfortune. Moving away from these stories of luxury, we get two songs on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, starting with Pilot Jones. This song follows two junkies, for lack of a better term, who seem to be engaged in a tumultuous relationship, blinding themselves from the realities of their addictions by not only having sex with each other, but of course, using. Both of them not willing to admit that they have a problem. We then get the song Crack Rock that not only continues these stories of drug abuse, but begins probably one of my favorite 3-track runs in recent memory. And for this song, there's a bit of real-world context that is needed. Frank's late grandfather struggled with substance abuse. After kicking his addictions, his grandfather would work as a mentor for Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous support groups. Frank would go to these meetings on occasion when he was younger and hear these stories of how drug addiction ruined the lives of these people. And inspired by that experience, he would use crack rock to tell the story of an addict, seemingly set during the 80s crack epidemic. Frank sings about how this person fiends for a high, hiding away from his family in abandoned homes to partake in his vice, stealing from people so that he'll be able to afford it, and his family cutting contact with him, as they don't feel comfortable around him anymore and kind of view him as a liability. In the third verse, he even discusses how some crooked police conspire to exacerbate the issue, trying to push more of the product on the streets, continuing that the cops don't care about the struggles of addiction that these people face, saying that if a cop was shot, the attacker would be hunted down without question. But if something were to happen to a civilian, most likely a black one, they would be ignored. And this is why I say that this was most likely set during the 80s crack epidemic. It was a time of real travesty for the black community. With the war on drugs raging on, victims of addiction or murder stemming from the distribution of crack were not taken seriously, with those in power pushing the agenda that they made their bed because they could have just said no, even hinting at U.S. law enforcement's involvement in boosting or encouraging the crack epidemic. Oh, sorry, there is no evidence to suggest whatsoever that the U.S. government was involved in the exacerbation of the 80s crack epidemic. None at all. But after Crack Rock, we get what many consider to be one of the greatest songs that Frank has ever made. The 9-minute and 52-second epic, Pyramids. Before I talk about this song, I want to talk about my album listening experience for a second. As mentioned earlier, I'm really picky about listening to albums for the first time. I need to be able to listen to an album all in one sitting. Otherwise, I just don't feel like I've fully gotten it. And because I live with my family currently, it's really hard to get an hour alone to yourself. I have been constantly interrupted, always getting to Super Rich Kids before being called to do something. And I'll be real, I wasn't feeling the album as much on those first 3 half listens. But after listening to the album for real 3 more times and watching a couple video essays, a lot of it started to click for me. But Pyramids was a song that immediately clicked for me the moment I heard it for the first time. It truly deserves its near 10-minute runtime. Like, you know a long song is good when it does not feel like it's gone on for as long as it is. Using a 2-minute commercial for Channel Orange, Pyramid tells the story of the decline in treatment of the black woman, who was regarded as a queen and a staple of beauty in ancient Egypt, but now being degraded and mistreated in modern Western society. I cannot stress enough how much I cannot do this song justice in this video. So I would highly recommend watching Elsie Not Elise's video essay on this song. I really hope I said her name right, as she shares the story of that song more eloquently than I ever could. But again, me first. I am more important. I need the money. Hearing a song like this, it's really shocking that just 3 people and John Mayer were able to make a song like this in just 3 weeks. Easily the best from the album, hands down, without question. The next song would be another unforgettable classic, the song Lost, and what once again is framed as like this fun summer song about a couple having a fun little international vacation, is the story of how a drug dealer's girlfriend is getting more and more enticed into the thrilling and dangerous lifestyle of drug distribution. Once more, it's no wonder why this song became a hit and is the most streamed song from the album on Spotify. Following that is the interlude White, a remixed instrumental of the song featured on the Odd Future Tape Volume 2, now featuring guitar from John Mayer. Following this interlude, we get Monks, and I'll be blunt, it's the weakest song from this album. It details the stories of groupies that Frank met on tour. But following this song, we get the album's emotional peak, the incredibly somber Bad Religion. In this song, Frank asks the taxi driver to just drive around, desperate for someone to talk to and vent out his emotions. The reason why I say this song is the emotional peak of the album is because the overarching theme of unrequited love comes to a head on this song. Still mourning the rejection by his first love, he attributes this unreciprocated love to a cult or a bad religion, as the way that many cults function is that you praise a person or deity that does not reciprocate those feelings of love or appreciation, and in some cases abusing the vulnerabilities of the members of the cult, putting them under the illusion that if they just do what they are told, they will get the reciprocity that they strive for. Frank was raised Christian and practiced Catholicism for a brief time, so he can look at these religions and cults from a unique lens, potentially also disavowing religions that don't approve of the love that he shares for Letterboy. But here Frank slowly realizes that this kind of love is unhealthy for both himself and Letterboy. He also hints at how hard it is to even open up about these kinds of things, because again, these are feelings he's sharing for another man, which was still very much a social taboo around that time. It is an incredibly beautiful song, but I just can't listen to it. And I don't mean it like I can't listen to it because it sucks. It's just one of those songs where like the moment I hear it, my mood is just gone down the drain. Similarly, for example, I cannot just like throw on Glimpse of Us by Joji, because that song, especially paired with its just heartbreaking music video, makes me emotional as hell. I honestly wish Bad Religion was longer, but again, I can't just throw the song on and not expect to shed a bit of a tear. But after that emotional roller coaster of a song, we get the penultimate track on the album, Pink Matter, with the legendary Andre 3000, the only other vocal feature on the album. This song is very philosophical in nature, with Frank questioning the very meaning of love in the human experience, even hinting at Frank's own struggles with coming to terms with his sexuality, mentioning 3 distinct colors of matter, in order: pink, purple, and blue, the 3 colors of the bisexual pride flag. Once more, I urge you after this video to find someone who can better do a deep dive on this song. It is so well written. It is so amazing. Both 3 Stacks and Frank kill it here, without question. But after that, we get the album's final song, Forrest Gump, an obvious nod to the classic 1994 film. Frank seems to personify himself in the character of Jenny, Forrest's love interest. In this song, while reminiscing on the good times that they shared and the feelings that he still has for him, Frank realizes that as much as he loves and appreciates Letterboy, it's time for him to move on, saying that he will never forget the impact that he's had on his life, beginning to stop blinding himself in ignorance and take his life for what it truly is. The album ends on the outro skit titled End. Creative title. Frank. In the background, you hear one of Frank's old Tumblr songs playing, called Voodoo, while in the foreground, you hear a somewhat distorted and warbly clip from the 2006 movie ATL. At this point, by the end of the song, Frank turns off the TV, and once again, goes back to his real life. And on all digital versions of the album, that's where it ends. But the CD version ends on the surprise bonus track, Golden Girl, featuring Tyler, the Creator. After the end on the CD, there is about a 1 minute and 30-second silence before Golden Girl starts abruptly. This song appears to take place in somewhat of a dream that Frank is having, appreciating someone who he believes to be his dream or golden girl. Not really my cup of tea, but an okay bonus track to close the album out on. But that in total is Channel Orange. As I mentioned earlier, it was hard for me to get into this album on first listen. Frank dives into such philosophical and deep questions on this album, and his writing style is just one that I was not super familiar with, as again, this was my first time listening to his discography. It's not a bad album at all, don't get it twisted. But just like Nostalgia Ultra, the lows drag the listening experience for me. Fortunately though, Channel Orange has much higher highs to make up for the lows on this album. But all in all, I see why this album was so universally beloved. If Nostalgia Ultra was just a taste of what Frank had in store, Channel Orange was a 4-course meal with dessert. This made him immediately a force to be reckoned with. And even though I might not enjoy it as much as some Frank fans do, it is still a legendary album worth all of its praise. And I wonder how people are going to react to my ranking here, but for me, Channel Orange gets a very close 7.9 out of 10. Still an undeniable classic. Frank would receive another massive W with Channel Orange. The album would get him 4 Grammy nominations, winning 1 for Best Urban Contemporary Album, and even passed the awards. It was universally beloved and hailed as one of the best releases that year, and since then has constantly come up in the Best Album of the 2010s and Best Albums of All Time discussions. And for good reason. But after all the accolades and a 12-show tour, when the world needed him most, he vanished. Well, not really. Even though we would go the next 4 years without a proper release from Mr. Ocean himself, he would feature on other artists' works, and would also be working on his own project in the background. And during just the Channel Orange era in general, maybe getting into a beef and scuffle with someone who lost the Grammy to him outside of a studio. You know, a certain R&B singer that, in the most YouTube-friendly way possible, really likes fighting women for some reason. But those notable features being on Earl Sweatshirt's Sunday from Doris, Superpower by Beyonce, New Slaves by Kanye West, and Wolves or Frank's track, also by Kanye West. Between those occasional feature appearances, Frank would start slowly teasing his next project, even releasing 2 songs on his Tumblr. In 2013, he revealed that he had been working with producers and musicians like fellow Odd Future member Tyler, the Creator, and Pharrell Williams, once more, but would unfortunately reach a point of writer's block for some time, keeping himself out of the public eye, all the way up until July 2015. On his Tumblr and his newly made website, boysdon'tcry.co, Frank would post a pic showing 2 unreleased Boys Don't Cry magazines, followed by the caption, "I got 2 versions." I got 2 versions. After virtually years of silence from him, getting any sort of announcement was big, with many fans believing that the title of this next music project was indeed titled Boys Don't Cry. This 2 versions announcement would remain in ambiguity until the following July in 2016, when we would get a new post on the Boys Don't Cry website with a bunch of crossed out dates with what appears to be a library card. This assumedly teased all the dates that Frank wanted to drop his next project, with the last date on the card being in July 2016, but with the day crossed out. This only brought more and more anticipation to what Frank had in store that summer, and the website would remain the same until August 1st, 2016. But this is where I need to pause to give you some context. Okay, Google, what time is it?
11:15 p.m.
Good fucking lord, I'm gonna be up all night. Now, even if you aren't a Frank Ocean fan, I'm sure you're well aware of the Frank Ocean finessed his label at a $20 million story. It is a tale as old as time at this point, but it is a necessary story to tell, in order to get the full magnitude of what would come of August 2016. As mentioned previously, Frank's deal with Def Jam was not the greatest. They gave him 14% of his album sales, doubted his potential from the start, and trapped him in a shitty contract. In order to get out of the contract with Def Jam, he would enact one of the most legendary finesses in both music and corporate history. When Frank signed, officially becoming a part of Def Jam in 2010, he promised them 2 albums within 7 years. The first obviously being 2012 Channel Orange, and following the success of that album, Def Jam would double the advance they gave him for Channel Orange, giving him a $2 million budget to work on his next and final album within his initial contract. In most normal cases, that's when the artist would renegotiate their contract with the label, but yeah, that did not happen. Frank would officially be out of his deal once he, 1, turned in the album to Def Jam, and 2, paid back his advance. And within between the time of Channel Orange and 2016, Frank was plotting. He had done a full revamp of his team to assist in this finesse. And in 2016, the perfect opportunity came to his doorstep. Now, in June 2015, as iTunes was starting to take a dive due to the rise of music streaming, Apple would officially start their own music streaming service, somewhat based on the pre-existing service Beats Music, which they owned, aptly titled Apple Music. In late November 2015, Apple assimilated Beats Music entirely, forming the service that we all know today in its current form. And if you remember from that era, they marketed the hell out of it the year of its launch. They partnered with many big artists for advertising campaigns and exclusivity deals, some of the most notable being Drake and Taylor Swift's ads where they're seen singing each other's songs, and also inspired that very infamous poorly timed Drake screenshot. Drake signed a deal with Apple that made the iconic Hotline Bling music video and the 2016 album Views both Apple Music exclusives for a week. While never officially disclosed, these Apple Music deals were paying artists millions, with some of the highest being an alleged $40 million with Drake. So somewhere around 2015-2016, Frank would sign an exclusivity deal with Apple for this alleged $20 million, according to friend and future collaborator A$AP Rocky, leading us to what would unfold in August of that year. So, on August 1st, after 4 years of anticipation, Frank starts a live stream on the Boys Don't Cry website. It shows Frank Ocean working on a staircase. This 140-hour live stream, supported by Apple Music, would run on and off for the next 18 days, with it occasionally playing never-before-heard music. On August 19th, the stream would end abruptly. As Frank climbed to the finished staircase, it cuts to an Apple Music link that would lead to a 46-minute-long music video, and this video would be a cut-down and edited version of the live stream, and would be considered his final album for Def Jam, Frank's one and only Apple Music exclusive visual album, 2016's Endless. Endless to this day sits so far removed from Frank's discography. For one, to this day, it is still an Apple Music exclusive, listed as a music video on the platform. The only other way to listen to the album without ripping it online or on YouTube were the limited edition physical releases of the album, on VHS, DVD, and vinyl, with official track listing. Before the proper physical releases even, there is still confusion as to where these songs started and where they ended. The album vaguely touches on themes of struggling to find a connection in the modern age. And the reason why I say vaguely though is because this highlights Endless's biggest issue. With a 22 song track list and a runtime of just about 46 minutes, these songs are too short. The album starts on an abridged version of Wolfgang Tillman's Device Control. He is a musician and fine art photographer who also shot the cover for Frank's next project, but we aren't there yet, just give me a second. This track briefly discusses the power that our technology possesses over us. This is a fitting start to the album, given the subject matter and the fact that it was an Apple Music exclusive, beginning with the lyrics, "With this Apple appliance, you can watch live videos." The vinyl and CD versions of the album would omit both this intro and its reprise at the end of the album. The first proper Frank track is the song At Your Best, You Are Love. This was initially uploaded to Frank's Tumblr in 2015 with the title You Are Love. This track was a cover of the late Aaliyah's cover of the Isley Brothers song of the same name, released initially on what would have been Aaliyah's 36th birthday. It is a great cover, not much else to say. It's great. It's also here where I learned that Aaliyah's song was sampled for the Leland theme. That's what we're calling it now. It's the Leland RDC theme. And the next track is Alabama, with vocals from Sampha and Jasmine Sullivan. First off, Sampa vocals, oh my god, they always hit, bro. They always hit. A sub 1 minute 30-second song where Frank reflects on a toxic relationship from his teen years. And it's a good song. But this is where the album starts to get a bit wonky for me. The rest of the album is filled with very short, sometimes wordless interludes that I don't think can be properly rated as real songs. The only thing that I can say for tracks like Xenon's, Walk Away, Rushes 2, and Higgs is that it sounds nice. I mean, the track that precedes Alabama, Mine, is basically just the end of Alabama, with Frank's overlapping thoughts surrounding him. But when looking at the notes I made compiling my opinions, the most repeated thing I say is that I wish the songs were longer. I said that 5 times. With most of the songs on Endless, they sound like they're just about to find their footing and then it's the next song or interlude on the project. It's a lot harder for me to do a track by track breakdown like this when roughly 36% of the album's runtime are these interludes or instrumental continuations of the previous track. Up until Endless, I believe that Frank Ocean has not made a bad song. And I still believe that is true with Endless, because none of the songs are bad. It's just like, I don't know why my brain goes to edging, but this is edging. This is musical edging. Frank still has some amazing moments on this project. My personal highlights are tracks like Comme des Garçons, You Are Love, Alabama, Rushes and Rushes 2, and Mitsubishi Sony. But I feel like there's so much more Frank could have done with his project. Now, look, for me, this is the first visual album that I've ever experienced, so that could factor into me not fully understanding its appeal. But for me, I'm a bigger fan of more like maximalist spectacles. And I'm not saying that Frank Ocean needed to do some like Michael Bay-esque JPEG Mafia sounding insane visual album, but it just doesn't hit hard as his previous projects for me. Endless to me is literally just Frank Ocean is assembling a staircase with some nice music accompanying it. I feel like the main reason for this album's existence hindered its true potential. I feel a similar way about Joji Smithereens. Now, this one is just pure speculation, but rumors started circulating that the album was similarly made to get out of Joji's deal with 88 Rising. While there have been no stories of Joji or anyone being mistreated by the company from my research, they have fallen off in popularity since the late 2010s, and Joji has been distancing himself a lot from them since his 2020 album Nectar. And there are lines on Smithereens about wanting to break free from something. And while I similarly believe that Joji has no bad songs, if you exclude the Pink Guy discography, Jesus Christ. Smithereens is commonly viewed as his weakest project, with a total 9 songs and a barely 25-minute runtime. It left much to be desired. It's not bad by any means, but coming off of his really amazing sophomore album, and one of my favorite albums of all time, it just doesn't stack up. Since Smithereens, Joji has also somewhat stepped away from the public eye, mainly just focusing on touring and posting to his new entertainment and media venture Plumcore, dubbed by fans as a pseudo-Filthy Frank successor. Come to think of it, in this video, I have been seeing a lot of similarities between Frank and Joji. In fact, have you ever seen them in the same room before? But for real, that's how I feel about Endless. It is far from a bad album, but I believe that its mythos as the lost and underrated Frank Ocean album is kind of an overstatement, especially given the fact that its predecessor would overshadow it for all eternity. It does show Frank's artistic evolution, with a lot more electronic sounds and a bigger focus on rapping, but again, given the foresight, it feels like a cut down version of what was truly next. This was like the PS1 demo disc to the actual game, so to speak. I feel like there is so much more he could have done. So for me, Endless gets a 6.7 out of 10. Not a bad album by any means, but not his greatest work. And that's where things seem to end for a moment. For all of August 19th, the internet was confused. Frank comes back from a 4-year-long hiatus with a 46-minute visual album that was only an Apple Music exclusive. Something isn't adding up. But the answers would come in due time. Despite the confusing nature of Endless, its film credits did end on the following card reading, "Blonde Boys Don't Cry," potentially giving fans a glimmer of hope that this was just the beginning. And they were right, because on August 20th, Frank would drop an Apple Music exclusive music video for a new song titled Nikes. And shortly after that single, we would get Frank's real second album, released fully independently, his 2016 legendary album, Blonde. Boom. I wonder if I'll remember to do that transition tomorrow. Is it even worth doing a transition at this point? I recorded the rest of that last night. I had to come back today. I finished recording at almost midnight, and I had school in the morning. So, yeah. Blonde explores themes of duality, grieving past love, and maturing through those experiences. The title itself is a metaphor for growth. Blonde hair is meant to signify some level of youth, innocence, and ignorance, as Frank spends the album reflecting on these character building moments from his youth. Despite the title of the album being Blonde, we see Frank on the cover art with green hair. And that's because when someone who dyes their hair blonde gets their head in contact with chlorine or doesn't do good upkeep of their hair, it starts to turn green. While the discussion behind blonde and blonded's true meaning is somewhat of a debate amongst Frank fans, the most common consensus is that it has something to do with innocence, to some degree. This is potentially meant to show that after the events of the album, Frank has matured or blonded. The title itself also demonstrates this kind of duality. The album is titled Blonde, but the cover reads blonde. The blonde on the cover is the masculine conjugation of the word in French, while blonde, the actual title of the album, is the female conjugation. There are many dualities to Frank's life as we see on this project, the most obvious one being his sexuality and personal gender expression. We see this kind of duality dichotomy in the Nike's music video, for example, with Frank posted up next to a bunch of sports cars while wearing makeup and eyeshadow, presenting himself in a typically feminine manner while being surrounded by symbols of masculinity to some extent. Speaking of which, the album opens with its lead single, Nikes. Nike starts the album off as a critique of materialism and how it affects our everyday interpersonal relationships. Starting off the song with these two high-pitched and almost robotic sounding verses from Frank, before we finally hear his real verse for the first time in 4 years in the final verse. An incredibly unique way to start off this album. The next track is Ivy, bringing back another important figure in Frank's life, Letterboy. In somewhat of a pseudo-sequel to Thinking About You, Frank discusses the emotions he felt after Letterboy confessed that he also had feelings for Frank 3 years later. To recount that letter, Frank said that he remained friends with him despite the clear elephant in the room, because he was too in love with him and just couldn't bear to let this relationship go. But especially with this new revelation, the relationship got a lot more strained. Frank is both heartbroken and angry that he put so much of his emotional time and energy into a relationship that ultimately went nowhere. Another banger. The next track is the album's most popular song, Pink and White, featuring Beyonce. Over this Pharrell Williams produced classic, Frank reflects on someone in his past who taught him acceptance, and to always understand that while life may not be perfect, it's always important to enjoy the moments of pink and white, because things can only get worse. It sounds a lot less depressing in context, I promise. The song features uncredited backing vocals from Beyonce as the song closes. Things like that really show how far Frank has come. From writing for her album just 5 years later to her now doing backing vocals for what would go on to be a critically acclaimed, beloved project, I'm sure that was an amazing feeling. I just hope that for Frank's sake he gave his obligatory thank you to Beyonce, otherwise he's in a lot more trouble than he knows. Next in the track list is the skit Be Yourself, featuring Frank's childhood best friend's mom once again, Rosie Watson, and spawning the most iconic line in all of music, many college students have gone to college, which is indeed true, I can attest to that. In this skit, Miss Watson leaves a voicemail to Frank, reminding him to stay true to himself and not get consumed by college peer pressure and get into drugs. A very beautiful and heartfelt message, followed by
Hand me a towel, I'm dirty dancing by myself, gone off tabs of that ass.
The next song, Solo. The song title itself is a double entendre, with solo sounding like both solo and solo. It seems to be a song where Frank reflects on some of the more lonely times of his youth, recounting a story of how he tried to link with someone that he was feeling, but ultimately got stood up, making him both solo and feeling so low. And so far, he has not yet missed on this project. Already one of my personal favorites. Following Solo is the track Skyline 2. This somewhat acts as a transition track between Solo and track 7. Frank laments the end of a summer season, reflecting on the experiences he had. But the next song is the fan favorite Self-Control, with vocals from Austin Feinstein and Young Lean. Frank sings about a failing relationship, saying that the other person was not mature or ready for it at all. It features a beautiful performance from all three of them, a classic in every sense of the word. Following Self-Control is the interlude Good Guy. Frank reflects on a time where a friend tried hooking him up with somebody, but they didn't match well, as Frank was looking for a more deeper connection with somebody, and they were just looking for a link. Probably one of my favorite interludes of his. But following Good Guy is another fan favorite track, the song Nights. Frank starts this song off on a high, both literally and figuratively, reflecting on the recklessness of his youth. Before we get to that famous beat switch that happens almost exactly 30 minutes into this hour-long album, or hour and 8-second album, but who's counting? The second part of the song seems to imply a mood change or crash of some sort, saying that Frank's high is now gone and he's becoming a lot more conscious of the state that he's in. This sets a mood change for both this song and the rest of the album. Following Nights is Solo Reprise, featuring once again the legendary Andre 3000. This is the only track outside of the skits where Frank is fully absent vocally, with production from the goated James Blake and the legendary John Bryan. Andre takes the original themes of Solo and uses that to reflect on his current state of the rap game and just general music industry, being saddened because he feels like people don't put enough effort into their music anymore. And I'm not gonna lie, the song was kind of a jump scare for me. I was aware that he was on the album somewhere, but because on both Spotify and Genius his feature is not listed, hearing that was that frightened me, but it was a welcome jump scare. Coming off the Solo Reprise is pretty sweet, a very chaotic song. It's hard for me to describe its overall message and story in this video, so I will once again be referring you to the blonde deep dives that I'll be putting in the description. Finish my video first, please. I need the money. Following that track is another interlude skit, Facebook Story. This follows French music producer Sebastian, who is also a credited producer on Endless, sharing a story with Frank in the studio about how a girl he started dating asked him to add her on Facebook. And he continuously declined, saying that he was right there in front of him and doesn't see the need to friend her on Facebook, wondering why she would even care about something like this in the first place. And with her believing that he was hiding something, she ended up breaking it off with him, with Sebastian still maintaining that he just doesn't understand why this is so important. The next track, coming more sonically off of Pretty Sweet, is Close to You. This is another cover of a cover song, with Frank interpolating Stevie Wonder's cover of the song They Long to Be Close to You, by the late composer and musician Burt Bacharach. I'm so terrible at names. It's the shortest non-interlude song on the album, and because of its shortness, for me, it does leave a bit to be desired. Far from bad, but would have been nice for it to be a bit longer. But following Close to You is the legendary White Ferrari. The White Ferrari is meant to be a metaphor for Frank's innocence and youth, as he reflects on a past love that still holds a special place in his heart. There's really not much else I can say. The song is it's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. And when listening, I experienced something that I'm dubbing the runaway effect when I heard it for the first time. When I listened to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy for the first time and heard the song Runaway, it already emotionally hit me like a ton of bricks. It is a beautiful song, and I felt this heavy emptiness in my heart when it got to the part towards the end where Kanye sings over that strong vocoder. But after listening to the album, I went to listen to Runaway in particular one more time. I just felt the need to. And when I hit play, the emotions really started coming in that time. And as much as I tried to hold it in, when that vocoder section came up again, I just straight up bawled, man. it was over. I was crying. And when I first listened to Blonde, this song stuck out to me immediately, just like Runaway. And I did feel the need to replay it. And once more, on second listen, the emotions just came out. And while I didn't completely cry this time, the emotions were there. I've only felt this way listening to 3 of my most cherished albums of all time, so this could be a sign of something. But all that to say, the song is damn near perfect. And it's an amazing coincidence that Kanye is a credited writer on that song, with him even having a supposed cut verse, only being featured as lyrics in the Boys Don't Cry magazine. But if you listen closely enough, at 2 minutes and 50 seconds, you can softly hear him say the word love. Thinking about the fact that he helped write White Ferrari makes me very, very disappointed in his current musical and lyrical output recently. But I digress. Top songs ever, for real. Following White Ferrari is another fan favorite track, Siegfried. And this song's story is constantly debated among Frank fans, but what I can say is that, again, it features amazing vocal performances from Frank. And he's winding down this album very beautifully. Following Siegfried is the penultimate track on the album, Godspeed, with Kim Burrell and once more Young Lean. A track where Frank just wishes a former love of his the best, but in a truly sincere and meaningful way, saying that he will always love them. And here, you see Frank's maturity. After spending the album in hell a lot of his discography, looking at past relationships with somewhat of a vitriolic and bitter and immature lens, he comes on this track to not only show the song's subject, but us, the listeners, that Frank has successfully, healthily moved past this heartbreak. It can look back on these memories fondly, leading into the final track on the album, Futura Free. This is kind of a last call kind of track. It's the best comparison I can think of, at least, where Frank just reflects on the hardships that he had to go through to get to where he was in his career. He raps about how Tyler, the Creator, slept on his couch when they were both coming up, how he was barely making minimum wage when he moved to Cali, and the line, "Tech company, please give me immortality," most likely hinting how his Apple Music deal freed him from the shackles of Def Jam, and most likely acknowledging that the finesse that he pulled with Blonde is legendary. It is, in my eyes, another underrated track. After listening to this album and Frank's discography in general, this is like one of the most well-deserved victory laps possible. The only thing holding it down, in my opinion, I guess, is that the song is 9 minutes and 28 seconds, but the last 4 or so minutes is the outro section, Interviews, which is a compilation of interview questions asked in 2012, featuring some of Frank's friends and his brother Ryan. Outside of me wishing Interviews was its own track, Futura Free is truly one of the best outros one could ask for, ending this legendary album on such an amazing high note. Look, it's hard for me to discuss my opinions on this album without regurgitating everything that everyone has been saying the past 8 years of its life, but it is an undeniable classic. Frank's bigger focus on rapping, this being a major turning point in his growth as a person and an artist, the emotional and hard-hitting performances from both Frank and guests, it is a damn near perfect album. I kind of get why some Frank fans are content with this being his last project, and part of that is cope, but to end on an album like this would really be just the most beautiful piece of poetry, really. My only gripe I could say that I had with this album was I did not personally experience the emotional impact that others have had when listening to this album. Whether it be my friends or just general discussions about Blonde on the internet, it seems like 90% of listeners were able to connect with it immediately. This album touches on so many rough heartbreaks and general young adult experiences, one could say, that I just personally haven't gone through yet. And I'm sure maybe the next time I fumble a baddie, White Ferrari will probably be on full blast while I cry into my pillow. But I just didn't get that immediate reaction that everybody felt. Despite that lack of personal connection, though, I obviously still see the value in this album. Tracks like Solo hit way harder for me than something like Ivy or Godspeed, because that feeling of isolation and loneliness is unfortunately a lot more relatable to me. Still, Blonde is truly amazing. And I feel this album growing on me a lot more as time goes on. And this has officially stamped Frank as a GOAT in my eyes. But without repeating myself and turning into a broken record, I'ma just say it. Blonde is an easy 9 out of 10. Absolute cinema, absolute everything. It's a fucking masterpiece. The Blonde era was truly something special. The album was already met with both fan and critical acclaim on the week of release, making people run to Apple Music to get access to this project. Fortunately, 3 weeks later, the album would come to major streaming platforms and would be out for everybody. And the only reason this album didn't get any kind of Grammy nominations or considerations was because Frank declined offering it to the Grammys committee for consideration, believing that the Grammys are an out-of-touch institution, a statement that Frank Ocean shamelessly stole from me 6 years before I said it. Plus, let's be real, this album would have been an easy sweep. let's keep it at 100. This would have been an easy win, even with those out-of-touch geezers at the Grammy committee. On Blonde's release day, Frank would also release the limited edition Boys Don't Cry magazine for free at certain pop-up shops in the US and one in London. It features new photography, writings, interviews, poems, and more, with contributions from Frank's known collaborators like Kanye West, Tyler the Creator, A$AP Rocky, and more. The magazine also features a CD version of Blonde that adds a closing verse to Nike's with Japanese rapper Ko, and an alternate mix of Pretty Sweet. There would also be an alternate version of the album in the magazine, solely in print form. A 12-song tracklist that omits many of the interludes and skits, omits Nikes, has lyrics to an unreleased song titled Easy, a new version of Mitsubishi Sony from Endless, and with these songs having alternate new verses, like on Nights and White Ferrari. The final verse on that being the supposed cut Kanye feature. And looking at it, definitely does match his writing style. The magazine was only reissued one more time for a price in 2019 online, but never again. And outside of the love that this project got, Frank scored another major W when he embarrassed the entire music industry. From this point forward, many record labels were very hesitant to allow for these exclusivity deals so that artists couldn't take advantage of it once again. I mean, hey, seeing that you got outsmarted out of a $20 million paycheck would ruffle my feathers as well. Like I said before, that was basically divine intervention. At the time of Apple Music's launch, music streaming was just now starting to become more popular. It was a market that not even the record labels were 100% sure how to navigate. And given that Frank signed his contracts in 2009, when music streaming was nowhere near as common as it was today, his legal team was able to find those loopholes and ambiguity in the contract to be able to pull this off. Outside of the $20 million from Apple, in the first week of the album's release, Blonde went number 1 and sold 1 million. All money that he got to keep to himself. Blonde would initially release independently under Frank's company, Boys Don't Cry, but any and all future music releases and re-releases of this album would come under Frank's newly formed music company, Blonded. Now, still in his deal with Apple Music, Frank would start hosting Blonded Radio, a radio show where Frank would air interviews, debut new music, and curate playlists for listeners to enjoy, thus spawning the 2 remaining musical eras of his career so far: the Blonded radio singles and Lucy's from 2017 to 2018, and music from his Scrap 2020 album, allegedly titled Look at Us, We're in Love. And now, given the fact that for the rest of this video, I am just discussing music eras and not proper projects, this is going to be even more less formulated than before, but starting off is the Blonded radio singles. Starting off with Frank's first solo release post-Blonde, the iconic Chanel, a song where Frank raps about his bisexuality in a very obvious manner. An instant hit that also debuted with an Apple Music One exclusive remix with A$AP Rocky. And in my opinion, it's weaker than the original, I'm not gonna lie. Rocky raps over a slowed down version of the instrumental, and it kinda takes the wind out of the song. I feel like if he just rapped over the pre-existing beat, or rapped over a beat with similar production, like an upcoming song from this era, it would have been better. There are fan edits of the song that put Rocky over the regular instrumental, and it sounds leagues better than the remix does. As you can tell, Frank really does enjoy the whole I got 2 versions thing, as his next release would be the song Biking, featuring Tyler the Creator and Jay-Z. Another instant banger, with Frank even releasing a solo version a bit afterward, both being on streaming. The next song he would release would be Lens, also getting another remix version with Travis Scott. Both versions of the song are great and solve the issue I had with the Chanel remix. Travis raps over a stripped down alternate version of the beat, and it bangs. I really wish he put that on streaming. At least we have Carousel. Next, we get another Apple Music exclusive remix, Slide On Me, from Endless, now featuring Young Thug. Now even better because it's the length of a proper song. Next would be Provider, another fan favorite classic. My favorite part about the Blonded radio singles is that you can truly see how far he's come in his music since Blonde. He has continued to release banger after banger. This era would end with the cover of the 1961 ballad Moon River, released on both streaming and his Tumblr on Valentine's Day 2018. It would be Frank's last solo release for another year. 2018 would also be the same year that Frank founded his luxury brand Homer. You know, the luxury brand where you sold that $30,000 ring. But we would come back musically towards the end of 2019 with Frank's first single, DHL. Premiered at the end of Blonded Radio Episode 8, it was Frank's first solo release in over a year, in what would have been the first single for an upcoming project, allegedly titled Look at Us, We're in Love, as a lot of unreleased merchandise frequently use that phrase, leading fans to believe that that's what would have been the name of his next project. There were technically 5 singles that came out for this album, with the bottom of each single highlighting a symbol, clearly hinting at a project of some sort. Following DHL was In My Room, a chill song where Frank just flexes his riches and gets ready to canoodle with a lover. And then the next song is the Spanish ballad Cayendo, describing a lover who does not give Frank the same amount of love he gives him. In my opinion, the weakest of the post-Blonde era, but still an okay song. The last song that officially dropped would be the song Dear April, another song of Frank lamenting another failed relationship. These would be the only 4 singles to get a proper release, even though technically there was a 5th single teased in late 2019 titled Little Demon, featuring UK rapper and producer Skepta. A banger snippet of Skepta and Frank going crazy on this Oogie Mane produced heater was previewed at a Prep Club performance in 2019 and was listed for sale as a vinyl single in December. But as we all know, 2020 would be an unfortunate year for many of us, as the unexpected lockdown from what I will be calling the flood invasion forced us all inside, halting any plans Frank had. And of course, the tragedy Frank faced that year when he lost his brother Ryan in a car crash. Among an already shitty year that halted any kind of music plans he had and a potential tour, Frank would also go on to experience one of the toughest losses someone can face. As mentioned before, Ryan was part of the interview section on Blonde, and he also chose the version of White Ferrari we have today, out of 50 that Frank had made. So, with the world still being in lockdown, a lot of Western society being in civil unrest, and the loss of your brother would definitely be demotivating and would cause Frank to scrap this project entirely. A message from the Blonded website in December 2020 stated that due to the events of that year, the Little Demon vinyl would no longer be released, issuing fans with refunds. Frank would continue to more or less stay out of the public eye, only appearing on a skit on Tyler the Creator's 2021 album, Call Me If You Get Lost, until it was announced in early 2023 that Frank would headline Coachella that year. And this had people hyped. Frank was about to make his first public performance in years, after even being the scheduled headliner for 2020's Coachella. That was obviously canceled. Now coming off of his greatest album and an unfortunate tragedy. And this performance would put a bit of a stain on Frank's otherwise flawless career. One of the first issues that came up for fans was that they were not selling Frank Ocean merch at Coachella at all, disappointing fans who wanted to buy a memento of this occasion. It got to the point where people were trying to buy signs that Coachella had put out saying no Frank Ocean merchandise as pseudo merchandise. Then it was announced that Frank's set in particular would not be live streamed on YouTube like the other performers were, disappointing the at-home fans who wanted to experience this performance as well, and probably can't afford to go to one of the most expensive music festivals on the planet. And the last big issue before the performance he had even started was how Frank would apparently scrap an elaborate stage production with ice skaters and choreographed dancers due to him apparently hurting his ankle. But after all these concerning decisions and showing up an hour and a half late, Frank finally comes on stage and puts on a very interesting performance. I haven't edited the video yet, but I'm pretty sure that what I'm thinking about right now is that one security guard throwing ass. Oh, good lord. Once more, it's hard for me to talk about this incident without regurgitating the exact same things people have been saying. But yeah, it was a mess. On top of showing up late, the performance was barely a performance. At best, it was a glorified DJ set of song remixes, with Frank only actually picking up the mic to sing a couple times. There were nice moments, like how he reminisced on his first Coachella with Ryan, announced that there was an album that he was working on, and the performance of alternate versions of White Ferrari and Self-Control. But it was a disorganized mess that made it seem like Frank was only there for a check. And I mean, hey, there isn't that much of a problem with that, but this is a bit of a disservice to them. People literally dubbed this year Frankchella, and it was going to be his first public performance in almost a decade. I understand that he hurt himself and was forced to scrap the majority of his performance, but I feel like he could have turned this performance into something special. He could have taken advantage of his limited mobility and done a more intimate, almost like NPR, Tiny Desk kind of thing. Being a more intimate performance with him, actually performing the majority of the songs. And I feel like people would have enjoyed that a lot more than what we had gotten. I am starting to see parallels with certain artists that I'm not enjoying thinking about. Frank would do that performance and then drop out of week 2 of Coachella. And any kind of real musical announcements up until today came in November of 2023. With him teasing a 1-minute snippet of a song fan-titled Younger Self. But since then, Frank has been virtually silent and gone off the grid once more, leaving him with a divided fan base. And that so far is the heavily abridged story of Frank Ocean. But let's bring it back to the top of the video. As I said, I wanted to start diversifying my palette of these R&B and rap artists. And after a month of working on this video, I can safely say that starting this journey with Frank was a fantastic idea. I finally got to see what all the hype was about this guy, and it is well deserved. With only 4 projects under his belt and 2 of them being lost in some level of obscurity, Frank has stamped himself as a music legend. If I had to rank his projects from worst to best, for me, it would probably go Endless, Nostalgia Ultra, Channel Orange, and Blonde. I firmly believe that Frank has never released a bad song, and his discography is an amazing example of what R&B and rap can aspire to be. Learning about his story has also given me a hell of a lot of respect for the guy. He is clearly someone who values his freedom, for better or for worse, and when he realized that Def Jam was not going to give him what he wanted, he worked tirelessly for almost half a decade to gain that well-deserved freedom. I know I made jokes comparing these two to him before, but Frank really does remind me of Joji and pre-2022 Kanye to some extent. All three of them were artists that had to fight for respect in music and are some of the most engaging creatives that I've ever had the pleasure of listening to. And even though Blonde was great, I hope that if Frank is in a better headspace, he can finally bless us with his next project, whenever that will be. Probably when I'm 50 with 2 kids. And hopefully more and more people will be able to fall in love with his music like I have. But that's going to be all from me, guys. Thank you guys once again for the channel support. It's been a pretty awesome year. I know in today's landscape, getting excited at 2,000 subscribers is not a big deal, but it is to me. I've been doing videos on and off on the internet for basically like my entire adolescence, so to see that like people are watching what I'm making and enjoying it has been nothing short of just awesome. I appreciate every single one of you. I have a lot of big plans for the near future and another, special video project, many in mind even. But for now, I'm gonna call it there. Once more, I will leave links to all of the music breakdowns and hell, even the links to the albums in the description. And, maybe local files for Nostalgia, Ultra, and Endless. But yeah, I'm gonna call it there, guys. Thank you guys so much if you made it to the end of this video. I really, again, appreciate all the support, and I'll catch you in the next one.